Well, here we go with week 2, 9. I don't even know. I've lost count on what we're doing here, but we're going to make it. God's going to get us through. We're studying 1 Kings 18 today. 1 Kings 18. Give it a read. You probably heard these stories back in Sunday school, and Elijah and the prophets of Baal, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about now. Good old Ahab was the king of Israel, and of course he's married to the wicked Jezebel. I think that's one of the questions on your sheet there. Ahab, he's actually the 7th king of Israel after Solomon's death and the kingdoms divided. If you remember that, Israel's to the north and Judah's to the south. But he's the 7th king of Israel. They really had no good kings that followed God in Israel in the northern kingdom, but Ahab obviously may be the worst because of himself and because of his wife Jezebel, and they are worshiping the god Baal, the pagan god Baal. That's also a question on your sheet. And they had Jezebel is a big spearhead in that. She's actually Sidonian, and they were big in Baal worship, and she kind of brought that on, kind of part of their marriage agreement, I suppose. Very odd. And she had been slaughtering prophets of God. Now, these are not all prophets that wrote books. These may just be what we would call pastors or ministers these days. But she had been killing prophets of God. And so they're going to have this big showdown. Because of that, actually, previous chapter, God had told Elijah to flee because Ahab and Jezebel, he'd been prophesying against them, and they were going to kill him. So God told him to flee, and he actually spent chapter 17, the time there, hiding out by the brook of Cherith, and ravens actually brought him food. The brook dries up because of the drought. That's one of the reasons they wanted to kill him, because he had prayed for God to send hardships on Israel, and a drought had taken place. That drought's going to last 3.5 years. That's another question on your sheet there, 3.5 year drought. And so he goes to the brook of Cherith. It dries up. He says, God, what am I supposed to do now? He sends him down to the coast, and he stays with the woman that we know as the widow of Zarephath. He asked her to make him a little cake. She said, I have just enough flour for one, and that's about it, and just enough oil. And he says, go ahead and make me my food. And a miracle takes place. God makes it where her flour and her oil never run out because of her generosity. And so she takes care of him. But now it's cool. In that chapter, God says, Elijah, won't you flee? Go away. But now he's like, I want you to attack. Come back and challenge Ahab, Jezebel, and the prophets of Baal. And so that's exactly what he does. So 3.5 years after drought, he comes back. Obadiah is a servant of God, a prophet. We don't know that this is the Obadiah that wrote the book to the Edomites. It may have been. There's actually 13 different Obadiahs in the Old Testament. It's a very common name. It means worshiper of God, more or less, in our language. And there's 13 different ones. Worshiper of God is what Obadiah means. But we don't know that it's the same Obadiah. But he's hidden out 100 prophets of God in these 2 different caves. It's been taking them bread and water because Jezebel was trying to kill them all and just expel them from the country. Elijah shows back up, contacts Obadiah, and tells him, I'm going to challenge the prophets of Baal, and they do that. And so he tells Elijah and Jezebel, you bring those prophets of Baal out to Mount Carmel, and that's where the challenge is going to take place, Mount Carmel. And so they meet there. There's 450 prophets of Baal that show up, and they've got a bull to sacrifice each. And he says, y'all go ahead and go first, build your altar, and then offer your sacrifice to Baal, and we'll see how powerful your God is. They do that. They go on. They're jumping around, leaping. It's pretty interesting. The same word that it uses here in 1 Kings 18 for the prophets leaping and jumping around is the same word Elijah had actually asked the people, are you going to serve Baal or are you going to serve God? But this leaping back and forth and just picking and choosing like a buffet, he said that's not going to work. You've got to make up your mind. Are you Baal? Then worship Baal. You're going to worship God. And of course, he wants them to worship God because he's the only true God. The 450 prophets of Baal cut themselves till they're just bleeding out, which was common with them. They're leaping around. And of course, Baal doesn't show up. There's nothing. And Elijah can't help it. He mocks him a little bit. It's like maybe Baal's asleep. Maybe he doesn't care. He pretty much talks the trash to him. Finally, they give up. And it's time for the evening sacrifice. And he says, all right. So he takes 12 stones representing the 12 tribes of Israel and builds his altar and cuts the bull and places on it, digs a trench around the altar for a purpose here in a moment. And he has 4 ceremonial washing pots filled. Now, these are big pots, ceremonial washing pots that, because of Levitical law, and pours them over the sacrifice, so much so that the water runs down and fills up the trench and is overlapping out. Totally drenches it. Not a good way to start a fire. And basically says the prayer of, God, this is not me, this is you. I know you are turning the hearts of the people back to you through your powers, and you're going to show them the way, and just use me as your instrument. Nothing I've done here today is causing any of this to happen. And of course, God brings fire down, which is kind of cool. It doesn't just burst in flames, down somehow onto the altar, burns up the sacrifice, cracks the stones, laps up the water, just consumes everything there is to the sacrifice. And of course, the power of God shows up because of Elijah's prayer there. Then it's interesting, of course, everybody is in awe. If you go on and read, they capture all the prophets of Baal. They actually execute them. Pretty crazy scene there. Ahab, of course, is just dumbfounded. He's like, what, he's got to be questioning, what have I been doing? Who have I been serving? Elijah tells him, he says, hey, you need to get yourself ready because rains are coming. And Elijah goes and prays, sends his servant out to look at the ocean, says, hey, look out towards the sea and see if you see anything. 7 times he sends his servant out to the sea, 7 times. And finally on the 7th time, the servant comes back and says, there's a cloud the size of a man's hand. Just a tiny cloud, in a big blue sky, just a puff of cloud, a cloud the size of a man's hand on the horizon. And that's when Elijah turns to Ahab and says, you better get yourself down off the mountain because heavy rain is coming. It's like, dude, it's a tiny, heavy rains are coming. It's a powerful moment because basically what Elijah is saying is, you better get yourself ready because God's about to show up. God caused the drought. Now God gonna cause the rain. So get yourself ready and get yourself down. Cool little side note, Elijah actually girds up his tunic and runs down Mount Carmel. It's about a 14-mile boogity cross-country people down out of the mountains, and actually gets ahead of Ahab. Somewhat of a miracle, some people say. Other people say, well, no, it's just he cut cross-country and made it down and didn't take the road. But nonetheless, kind of a cool side note. But a cloud the size of a man's hand, get yourself ready because God is coming. And I think that's exactly kind of where we are right now. I don't have good answers. The question is not why, I've already told y'all that, but how can we serve during this crazy time? But God's gonna show up, and he's all around us all the time anyway. But a cloud the size of a man's hand because heavy rains are coming. That's 1 Kings 18. Hope you got all your answers for your sheet, and we'll keep studying on through. What a great blessing.